Hello, my name is Carol May Whittick, spiritual life coach and your host of Her Conversations, Tools for the Awakening. Her is an acronym for Higher Energetic Resonance. This is the optimal state to embody in order to attract our highest desires. What is the awakening? This is the moment in time when humanity rises up out of the darkness. Who is awakening? Each one of us present on earth today, reclaiming our sovereignty, seeking greater possibilities in our reality and looking for solutions. We know being awakened is not a lofty ideal but a necessity. If we can transform ourselves, we can change the world. Guests on Her Conversations will speak to your spirituality, sensuality and soul. Listen to their stories and hear how they are in service to the world. So let their words and these conversations embolden and inspire you. As we're in the last month of 2023, it's the perfect opportunity to reflect, assess the year that's passed, and then plan and be prepared for 2024. The majority of people who make resolutions do so without truly considering what it will take to achieve them. They mention many things they'd want to happen or changes they want to make without laying the foundations, which is why, in my opinion, they can't follow through, and then begin another year with a failure that further reinforces their belief that change is impossible for them. So with flow into 2024, each episode this month will have a new focus that builds on the week before, so that by week 5 at the end of December and days before the new year, you're primed and ready to flow into 2024, fully clear about what you want, why you want it, and what it will take to get you there. So this series already started last week, so if you want to get on board with that, look for the link in the show notes for the podcast and the mailing list, because in order for you to fully participate in what I've created for this series, I've designed weekly journal sheets so that you can engage in the series in a deeper personal inquiry of each of the week's topics. And not to worry if you've missed any of the preceding weeks, because the links to the prior weeks will be included in any subsequent email. My guest this week is energy healer Sunday Oliver. She combines magic with logic to help people with mystery illnesses that doctors are unable to help with. She also helps with the kinds of sensitivity that make us more vulnerable to depression, anxiety, and being easily overwhelmed. During our conversation, Sunday shares her journey of overcoming an illness that rendered her bedridden to healing and creating her unique methodology. Also in this episode, Sunday gives a demonstration of some of the energy work that she does so that we can experience the shifts her work creates. So as always, I begin by asking my guest. Her is an acronym for Higher Energetic Resonance. When do you feel that higher energetic resonance?
I feel it a lot when I'm in nature, and I feel it a lot when I do my healing work. And I'm happy to say I feel it more and more. So that's a possibility for everyone.
Sunday, before we go over and get deeper into this episode, please just share a little bit about your life and what got you to where you are today.
I grew up in a family that was very appreciative of intellectual things and the arts, and that had its really wonderful parts, and it also had some parts that were a little sticky for me, because when I was 14, I had what I call now a shamanic awakening, but back then was called a nervous breakdown and caused a lot of consternation. And one of the ways I dealt with that was to go out into the woods a lot and hang out with plants and nature. And I also wound up doing a lot of research in libraries on plant medicines and different kinds of things like that. Eventually, I wound up living for 28 years without running water and electricity, because I wanted to get more in touch with nature and the elements. And to me, that was the way to do it, because it's just so much easier when you're out in it. And this is true for everybody, by the way. It's just like, even if you're out there for 5 minutes, your state is going to change. And so, that wasn't the only thing I was doing, but I was out there for 28 years, and I listened really deeply, and I learned a lot doing that. So in some ways, I'm kind of a bicultural hybrid, because I do still have the intellectual side, and I do research, and that applies to what I'm doing now, the healing work. I use science, but I also believe that, there are realms beyond science that are really effective. And that was lucky for me when I got my illness, where science said, oh, well, your fate is to get worse and die.
Right.
And too bad about that, because we have no idea how to cure you or do anything that will really help you much.
Mm-hmm.
And so that was chronic fatigue immune dysfunction syndrome. But I will say, I call these illnesses mystery illnesses because things like fibromyalgia, ME, Lyme, long COVID, they all swap symptoms. The medical community would like to think that it's very neatly arranged, where there's a set of symptoms for each of these, but it's just not true. And I know that because I was on a forum of people with these illnesses for a couple of years. And, we talked about how it's like, well, chronic fatigue, you're not supposed to have muscle aches, are you? Yeah, but you do. And so they all spread around. So this is why I call them mystery illnesses, because I really think that there's kind of one approach to them. Mm. And something that happened for me during finding my way through a mystery illness was that I began to realize that part of what had kept me down was, as a lot of sensitive people do, I took on a lot of stuff that wasn't mine, and I thought that by doing that, I was actually doing the world good, because we're kind of taught that, right? It's sort of like, self-sacrifice. Oh, it's such a wonderful thing. Is it really? It's a question we might want to ask. And so what I also found going through and finding my way through dropping like hundreds of symptoms that I wasn't supposed to be able to drop, still have a few left, is that I truly believe, and this is why I want to work with people who are in similar situations, I truly believe that not only can you find your way through these illnesses, but it's important to do it because people who have these kinds of illnesses, and also people who are just really sensitive and kind of prone to get them if they continue on that way, without understanding that taking things on is not really the optimal way to go, that we are people who really are the leaders the world needs now, a really different kind of leader, not a leader that tells people what to do, but a leader that inspires people. And that can look a lot of different ways. It doesn't have to be big and dramatic and international. But that's one of the things that really inspires me in my work with people, because I know that there's so much, harmonious power that can be unleashed, but we've battened it down for all of these various reasons, a lot of them having to do with, 300 years of European Inquisition and witch burning, and, and in other people's cases, slavery that, said, oh, well, your religion and spiritual practices can't happen. You have to do Christianity, that kind of thing. So I think that a lot of times as sensitive people believe that we don't have the power, or that we're afraid to use the power, but we do, and it would be really helpful for the world if we did.
I'm with you on people finding the power that they have within them. I think at this point in time, it really does feel that we're at a real low and a real divide at the moment. And then the divide that within the divide are people who have maybe sunk into deeper levels of unconsciousness, and not just necessarily unconsciousness to the world, but then unconsciousness to their own bodies. Like somehow they're here and they're existing and they're functioning as beings on the planet, and yet not contributing in a way that is moving us forward in any way. And there's many terms for this, and I don't want to use like derogatory terms, but like if you come from somebody like Dolores Cannon would used to talk about backdrop people, or then you've got the other side where people are very derogatory and we'll call them like NPC or sheep, but what they're both referring to are human vessels, but just not really consciously functioning in terms of being connected, and like I said, not even connected to the world, but most definitely not connected to themselves. Is it for us who see that we have some level of duty or some level of calling to be the people who kind of put their head above the crowd and go, I'm going to show you my thing and share my words in the hope that this will inspire you to ignite the spark in yourself and then, work in your own communities. So we kind of spread a ripple of awakening to all our powers. But then for the people that are deeply in that unconscious state, do you have any thoughts about that? Do you have any thoughts about who these souls are?
You mean the people who are what you call the background people?
Yeah. They've been called that, but it's, I believe everyone's got a spark of something, and somehow they've retreated into a level of safety or a place of non-connection somehow.
Mm-hmm. Yes, I think we've kind of educated ourselves out of that in a lot of ways. And one of my things is that I say a lot is remember that you're a part of nature, because we are. And I think forgetting that is part of what's created a lot of this division that you're talking about, and also the numbness. And I love what you said about, people being willing to step forward and, say their say or do their dance or whatever it is in their community to create that spark. Because I really feel that if enough of us do that, then it's sort of like the circuits will start to light up. It's that Buckminster Fuller thing of, don't try to fight, what's problematic, but make something else that's so good that other people will realize that the old way is obsolete. How
do you feel about the times that we're in and the transition that we're going through, and like you say, the building of the new to make the old obsolete? What I'm seeing or what I'm feeling is there's people seeing, okay, we need to change things because you can't continue this way, and putting down foundations, and maybe things are not fully visible yet on where we're going and what we're creating for the future, for the transition. And this is probably why it just feels so angsty. It's the only word that I can come up with at the moment, and it just feels like the division, things are being divided so it's like how thin can you slice the pie? Because they're just like trying to divide it and divide it and divide it, and then people go off into their own groups, and then somehow within those groups, the groups then start to fight each other, and then the groups splinter off, and then we have more pieces and more pieces till the point where, like, where do we go with this, where we're so separated? And then with the emergence of, technology taking a step forward, virtual reality really stepping forward, AI becoming more and more used on pretty much every platform online now is integrating AI. To not necessarily say that it's a bad thing, because here we are using technology, to do what we're doing now. Like you say, that we need to maintain that connection to nature so that we're then able to still use the technology and still, have our hand in the soil, metaphorically and literally as well. How does that show itself up for you? And also, how does that show up in the work that you want to do at this time that feels so pivotal?
Great question. I will say that from about the age of 8, I was really depressed about the state of the world and what people were doing to nature. And at that point, there weren't sort of the obvious signals that there are now that, it was a problem. And so it was sort of like everybody was saying, well, it's fine. It's like, what are you worried about? Don't be silly. Just fall in line, follow the program, do the thing. And I just couldn't. And so that has been a lot of angst and depression for a lot of my life. But interestingly, what started to happen after I got this illness, some of us kind of need to be hit on the head by a 2x4, and I think that was me. So I got this illness that sort of essentially had me prostrate in bed, in all kinds of pain, unable to speak, talk, think. So I had to draw on other kinds of resources. What I realized was a lot of what was happening for me was due to my kind of internal battle. And that most of us have these internal battles because we're taught that's how you get through life. You know, it's like you fight your way through life, you meet the challenges, blah, 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 blah. And what I discovered was that is actually a terrible thing to do to your body. Terrible. Which is maybe one of the reasons why we are, so many of us, kind of outside of our bodies in a lot of ways. Because what happens when you have that kind of attitude is you create the kind of chemistry which actually a lot of people have now, because our world is so full of these triggers, as you say, to fight, 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 you know, sort of like disagree with that, criticize that, make sure you don't do that. And if anybody else does that, you better, you know, give them a hard time. It's so geared toward that kind of thing that we forget that there isn't actually another way of being. And that's what I had to learn myself, because there are physiological effects in your body chemistry that create inflammation, that create a cortisol kind of loop that you get in. Basically, what happens is when you get sort of triggered in any way, this revs up an old instinct that was meant for us when we were living, you know, much sort of more simpler lives, and a physical animal was going to prey on us, you know, or maybe another human being. But, you know, like if a bear or a lion was going to jump on us, then this gets activated, so that what happens is basically shuts off blood to the brain, so you become stupid, but it gives all your energy to your muscles so that you can run fast. And then you run fast and you get away from the danger, and then it's over. But in modern life, as you were just saying, it's trigger after trigger after trigger after trigger. And so the state that most of us are in is the state of hyperarousal, where we are, yes, I'm sorry, stupider, because a lot of our energy is not going where it was like originally designed to go. So when a trigger happens, we get this little message, and it triggers something in our nervous system that triggers our chemical system and triggers our adrenals. And then they start pumping out cortisol. And that's fine. But the problem is that if it keeps going and going, what happens is the cells get flooded with this cortisol, and they shut down their little hatches, the cell receptors that take in the cortisol, so they won't be overwhelmed. But then the message that the pituitary gland gets is, oh, the cells aren't getting any cortisol, so more floods. So this is the state that a lot of people are in, this state of hyperarousal. And I think a lot of people don't even realize it.
The idea of people not realizing, yeah, I can attest to that, because I'm just seeing it played out in so many ways. Each generation kind of has an iteration or a different iteration of being in that state of just disconnect, disbelief, stress. And then now, with the way that the world is, just it always seems to be like every 6 months or so now, there needs to be some big thing that gets really pushed to the fore, so that then people are in a state of outrage. You know, so you've got outrage, you've got people are like constantly in their fight or flight, the brain's not working, and then there's like this ongoing level of fear that's being like pumped out, you know, just like concern for the future, because everyone is now going into survival mode about finances and how are things going to be going forward, and where are we now, and just complete distrust about everything. And then the only way you can really keep people engaged is on the level of bread and circuses. Literally, it's just pure entertainment, and even then the entertainment is so
Violent.
Violent or fleeting, you know, like on social media. I know I make them myself, so I shouldn't like decry them completely, because I'm part of I'm adding to the content. I like to think that I'm putting something useful out there. Some people might say it is, some people say like anybody adding to the noise is adding to the noise and not really helping people. But it's just that shortening the attention span to the point where anyone who thinks that they have to focus on something for more than 60 seconds feels overwhelmed with the amount of, like, oh my God, 60 seconds. Like, you know, you look at how long something is before you go into it. So if you can't even like hold your attention on something that's whizzing and banging and flashing in front of you for 60 seconds, is it any wonder that you can't be in your body all day long? And where is it that you've gone? I was told by a younger person the other day, I was asking them, what did you do in your weekend? And they're like, oh, I just like hung around, stayed in bed. I'm like, well, what did you do? They were like, I was watching TikTok. I was like, how long did you do that for? They said 10 hours. Unbelievable to me. You know, I'm trying to think, did I ever used to watch TV that long? And what's that doing to the minds, and where is the spirit of those children going with it? They're just getting fed like 10 hours of sound bites. I mean, it's like, how much is that? 600 pieces of like little, if we're just talking about minutes, you know, just in the brain. What is that doing to you? Where does your soul come through? And then, of course, we have like this onslaught of just more and more diagnoses of different conditions from the youth, that then see their bodies as the enemy, or you know, it's like, oh, my body can't do this, and they're lost in anxiety, and the future doesn't look good. How do we drop spirit into that? How do we kind of get to the point where people don't want to be on their phone? They do want to go in nature. And to add, actually, I saw this on social media, but someone shared it, that apparently there is this trend, even though someone put it on social media to talk about it, that you go for a walk without your phone. And it's a new thing.
Wow, how unusual.
You know, guess what, guys? Like, there's this new thing, and I think it's amazing. Like, you can go for a walk without your phone, without your earbuds, without a podcast. Like, imagine that, you know, and it's, who'd have thought that we'd be here?
I know, but we humans, we're very good at distracting ourselves, I think. And something that you said kind of rang a bell with me, because I think of it this way, but I also, because of the work I do, I think of it another way. You were talking about, how do we bring spirit into this density? Well, it's already here. In fact, one way of looking at physical reality is that it is a very expensive form of energy, of spiritual energy, because it's so dense. You know, it takes a lot of energy to make us be physical. And as we know from science now, we are actually more space than we are matter. So everything in us is malleable, which gives me some hope, but also allows me to work on a level that I wasn't able to before I went through this illness. Because, you know, we've been talking about this sort of like hustle bustle, warlike energy, essentially. And what I realized is it does have its place, but we've kind of made it above all other things. And that in order to get to a different place, what we need to do is go deeper. And that's what I call the foundation work. I have a program I call the Healing Catalyst Foundation Program. And what I do in that program is, for 3 months, we just look at, we don't just look at, we experience. And I'd like to do like an example of what I do for your audience too. Mm-hmm. You learn to experience a new kind of, resonance, you know, as you were talking about. You know, it's like, I love your talk about resonance, because this is what it basically is entrainment to a certain kind of resonance. Mm-hmm. And that's what those kids who are out there radically walking without their phones, that's what they're doing. They're entraining themselves to their environment. And it's like, wow, cool, you know, here we are. And yet here we always were, because every moment that we breathe, we're exchanging breaths with plants, right? And, you know, there's no way that we can really be separate, but we somehow imagine that we are. Mm. And I think that what happens is that we get caught up in that imaginative story, and we forget that it is just a story that we made up, and that the reality is so much deeper. So this is what I like to do in foundations. I like to help people remind their bodies that they can calm down and not be in that fight, flight, freeze mode more and more. And they can entrain themselves to that. And they can also learn not to pick up other people's stuff or to consider it their job to do, or even to consider it a good thing to do, which I think a lot of really well-meaning people get stuck in.
Yeah, I think it's that fear of being seen as selfish. The idea of selfish not being such a negative thing is people are opening up to that a little bit more, realizing that just giving and going into like martyrdom isn't serving anybody at all, because like your martyrdom then turns into resentment, and there's a whole breakdown of things. Whereas if you're working from yourself and then you're able to give from that place, there's less, or if any, depletion. Tell me about the process that you're doing and you want to share.
It's a process that basically that I call the HPA, but it actually involves a lot of other things. The HPA is the hypothalamus pituitary adrenal gland. It's something that you hear about in medical science and also in psychology now. Mm-hmm. And that's sort of like the basic mechanism for fight, flight, freeze. But what I do in addition is, well, once you've been inside your body the way I had to do in order to, get to the point that I am, I had to look at myself on a molecular level. And then I thought, well, it's like, it's always better to go deeper than the level that you want to work on. So I thought, okay, well, we'll go atomic. And then I thought, well, what happens if I go subatomic? And then it was like, I was out in the cosmos and it was like stars and sky. And I realized, oh, that's what we are, and that is what we are. And that is a level on which we can exist, including our physical life. It's like, I think the story that we have in so much of our culture is that, whatever you want to call the beautiful intelligence that creates the universe, that's something that's far away and up in the sky. And, it's like, we can maybe aspire to it and maybe touch it for a moment, but we can't possibly live with that all the time because we're just too unworthy and blah, blah, blah. And this is stuff that I have believed. So, and I'm sure that there's still remnants of that, but I just want to, call it out because it is so damaging. And, when I made that realization that I am that cosmos, and when I saw something recently from astrophysicists who say, oh, we're looking at pictures of the cosmic web and we're looking at pictures of people's neural networks and they look a lot alike, Mm-hmm. And I think it's because they are the same thing. We are part of the same thing. So what I do is I do my best to help people attune or entrain to that deep state so that we remember that is what we are and that it isn't separate from our material life. It's not separate from our bodies. It's not separate from, you and me talking, and it's even not separate from technology. It's not separate from anything. It can't be. And yet we've forgotten that. So I guess basically what I do is I help people remember that, like literally remember it, put it in the members of your body. Would you like me to do an example?
Yeah, it's all yours.
Okay. All right, then. I'm going to do what I call calm outside nervous system. And this is actually something that if you're interested, you can pick up a free recorded copy of by signing up on my email. Because what it is it's exactly what we've been talking about. It's like you have all this stuff coming at you and it's just like your system gets frazzled. If it were electrical wires, it would be like the rats chewed at it and there's bare wires kind of hitting each other and sparking and fusing and stuff. Mm-hmm. So that is a lot of, what we feel when we get sort of all this bombardment. And so this is to, if it were electrical wiring, this would be smoothing the insulation back onto the wires so that the messages you get come through in a calmer and more orderly kind of way or harmonious kind of way. Mm-hmm. So what I do when I do healing work is I do something involving sound. And I love that you use sound in your work because I think it's super important. I think actually a lot of the silent work I do is a kind of silent sound. I can't, scientifically prove that, but it sure feels like it. And so I'm going to go silent. Your job is to get comfortable and relax, mm-hmm. and maybe check in a little bit to what your emotions are, what your thoughts are, what your body sensations are. What I do is going to be very boring because I'm just going to sit here with my eyes closed. So I would recommend eyes closed for you also, because the show is inside you. The show is in what you experience. Okay? So I'm going to go silent and I'll say it's over when it's over. Here we go. Okay. So checking again with your thoughts and your emotions and your body sensations and noticing differences. And if you like those differences, maybe just notice them for a little bit longer, savor them a little bit, because that integrates them into your nervous system. So attuning to things like this, to deep sensations like this is what can take us deeper than meeting challenge after challenge after challenge. And it can take us deeper into the truth of who we are and what we're doing on this planet. And there are many angles to get at that from, but this is a really helpful way to do it. Because I think we really have to experience these things. This is why I love what you say about resonance. Because if we don't experience them, we don't really know them. Mm. You can talk about it for a long time, and talk can be helpful to a certain point, but it's a starting point. You've got your hand on the door, but you need to open the door of experience to really get there.
How did you create this work?
Well, it was a long and winding road for me. Because basically, when I got ill, first I tried to do tons of research because, that's my shtick. And I've done a lot of alternative health research. And I thought, okay, well, I'll find something and blah, 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 because I'd done it before. And, drinking water is a great idea, by the way, after energy work. Yeah, I'm glad you did that. I tried all these protocols by really smart people. Like there was a retired biochemist from Lawrence Livermore. There were doctors. There were also just people who had tried stuff and it had worked for them. So I tried these protocols, and I was really devoted to doing them. I tried different diets. I tried eliminating gluten. I tried, I did all that stuff. And I tried different therapies. I tried acupuncture, which actually is helpful for some people, but wasn't for me. I tried, different kinds of therapies that, seemed likely. And they may have helped me some, but basically I still got worse. And so one day I had gotten to the point where basically I could sit up for only about 10 minutes a day because I had what they call orthostatic intolerance. So you're basically so dizzy that when you sit or stand, or in some cases even raise your head from the pillow, you get faint and you pass out. Mm. So I was sitting up for that 10 minutes and I was realizing, it takes me a while. I was realizing, all these things aren't working. So, having extended my brain as far as I possibly can, given that cognition was pretty much like a sea of mud at that point, I thought, okay, that's not working. I spent 2 years on that and gotten worse. So what do I do? And the answer I got from listening deeply inside was listen deeply inside. And so I started doing that. And, I'm going to make a long story short because it was a winding road. But what I eventually began to find was that things that had sort of an energy healing component to them were the things that started to work for me. And I started doing various forms of like very deep meditation, like hour and a half was a warm up, 3 hours was really good. And I did a lot of that. You know, I chose to set aside time to just do that. And I kept finding there were a lot of telesummits at that time. There were about different kinds of health modalities. And so I listened to a lot of those. And some of them were pretty bogus, I got to say. Some of them were, you know, maybe great, but not for me. But some of them really went ding, ding, ding. And so I started, you know, working with some of these programs. And then I eventually wound up working with a healer for about 1.5 years on a regular basis. And that, I think, was what really got me going, because unfortunately, these healers didn't totally understand my situation, because it's really weird. I mean, it's very weird when all your systems go wacky. And I think if you haven't been there, you kind of can't get it. But there are some healers who understand the nervous system or who understand body chemistry. And those are the ones that I work with the most. And I realized at one point, well, I have to kind of make my own thing. And actually, the healing piece that I just did was, I think, the first piece that I made for myself, by the encouragement of the healer that I was working at the time. And she said, well, you know, you're asking me to do these things. Why don't you just try doing them yourself? And I was like, oh, well, yeah, I guess I could try that. And so I did. And I realized that in my case, anyway, I was the only one who could find the places that I needed to heal, because I was experiencing them. And if you don't, you know, if you're not in that situation, it's pretty difficult to find them. So I began doing more pieces of work. I began recording work, and when you record it, you can kind of crank it, which can be helpful for, especially for physical things. You can just kind of keep rolling it, which is what I advise people to do, only on a very careful basis, because some of them can kind of be disturbing because they're healing things that have been longstanding. But things like the piece that I just did that I offer on my website is that you can just safely play as long as you want. And you can do it because it's silent. You can do it, like, put it on your phone, do it while you're in a distressing situation, or do it while you're reading the news or listening to the news.
The question that came up for me while you were speaking was, how and why did you maintain hope?
I'm not honestly a believer in hope.
Or why did you not give up?
Because I was curious.
Right.
I was curious and I was stubborn, and at a certain point, I've kind of like had to start leaving the stubbornness behind, because it no longer served me. But for a certain time, yes, it did. But yeah, the thing about hope for me is sort of like, hope is always jammed tomorrow. It's like when I belong to a forum that's attached to a medical practice for people who have these kinds of illnesses. And I see a lot of people, you know, talking about, oh, how, you know, and this was on the other forum that I used to belong to too. It's sort of like, oh, you know, someday medical science will come up with a cure for us, you know, and we hope, you know, we have hope in that, and blah, blah, blah. Hope is always jammed tomorrow, you know, it's like never jammed today, right? So that was actually one of the things I had to discard, is the notion of hope. And instead, I went for something that felt deeper to me, and I would call that curiosity, because curiosity has always made me wonder, well, what's next? What's next? What's next?
But why did you have that? Because, you know, as you know, as you were talking about all the things that you went through and trying things for so long, when many would have given up, where did that come from? What was that?
That's a good question. I think that maybe that is a really good question. I mean, I think I did have an inborn curiosity, but also I think all of the shamanic work that I did, you know, living in the woods and sort of learning the resonant frequencies of all that I was around, and basically also listening to nature spirits, that gave me a deeper grounding than I think a lot of people have in this kind of situation. I knew there was more that I could draw on. I just didn't know how I could draw on it. And I think too, and I would guess that you were also this kind of person that even as a kid, it's just, it's like, I always just am curious about how things happen and how they're made and all that. Yeah.
I have a curiosity, but I've never had a long-term illness, that's kind of just really restricted me and kept me in one space. So when you were speaking, it was like, would I have that patience? Would I have that curiosity? I don't know. That's not been my path really, and just knowing that it's a rare thing. But then on the other side of it, you're here and you've got this offering. You're then able to contribute to transformation in the world in a way that you probably wouldn't without the experiences and the understanding of where you've been and what you experienced. Maybe let me ask you this: did time feel different because of where you were?
Oh, very much. Time was very elastic. And I'd also like to say this, just in case people think I'm some kind of saint. There were a lot of times when I was moaning and crying and despairing. And I think that is kind of a natural part of it, because what happens in these illnesses, basically you lose your identity. I was a person who read a lot, couldn't read anymore. I was a person who played music and listened to music all the time, couldn't do that anymore, blew my brain out. And I was a person who took long walks, couldn't do that anymore. So there's a lot of grief that goes with this, because we truly believe that, what we do is who we are. And there's a sense in which that's true. But there's also a sense in which there's a deeper truth of ourselves. And I think I just had to sort of grapple and find and fumble my way to that.
And tell me about time as well, like elaborate on that.
Okay, I actually would love to do this, because time is something that I like working with. So what happens when you no longer have this rota of activities because you can't do them? It took me 20 minutes to dress on a good day because I had to rest in between, like putting one sock on and then, all the rest. What happens when you're in that state is, I think you go into something maybe a little bit more like, maybe it was more like when I first started living out in the woods. I was living off the road, near a river. And, it's like actually one of my specified aims was to go beyond clock time. Clock time always felt so, hemming in to me. So I think that when I was ill, in a weird way, I retrieved that. I was living by a deeper kind of time. And what I also found was that when I started doing healing work, I could go backward and forward in time to help people heal. For instance, I did a telesummit like in 2015, I think, and I did what I called email healings, because I could never count on my energy level at that point to be, up. So I would say, okay, I'm going to give you a healing in your deepest sleep this night. That afternoon, my time, I would be lying on my bed, doing the healing work and sending along the timelines, which I look at that honestly as part of the cosmic web. Time, it makes time and space, right? Time and space. So I would just send it along and they would get it in their deepest sleep. So if that was, it made me look again at kind of the weird way we have of reducing time to ticking minutes when it can be so many other things.
Yeah, I was just thinking, because I'm thinking like you're spending all this time, but then you're pulling it backwards and forwards and manipulating it and realizing how malleable it is when you do play with it, and then how rigid it can be if you want to turn it into something rigid, so it was just me thinking, because you've spoken about things that to someone just listening would be like, you did that for how long, that it just sounds like a huge expanse of time. But then things that I experience with time when I'm doing something that I enjoy, the the time, quotation marks, flies. I always used to remember when I had a normal job sometimes. So I used to work normal jobs to make money so that I could go in the studio and make demos. And so especially when I was doing waitressing and things like that, an 8-hour shift is painful. It really is.
It is, especially as a waitress. That's really hard work.
Yeah, it's just not good times, not good experiences. I mean, there was one time I remember there was this experience of a day that was just like it wasn't even a busy day. It was one of those days where no one seemed to want to come anywhere near the restaurant, and it was so boring. It was I just always, sometimes you have those peak experiences where you're like, I'm never going to forget this day. And I remember that period of time just being so draining on me. It was so boring. There was like literally nothing we could do to make it go any quicker, because we were cleaning everything to try and make the time go away, and then because there hadn't been any activity, there was really nothing to do, so we just had to wait it out. So going from periods of like feeling every micro millisecond, like the infinitesimal passage of each tiny second, to then going into the studio and having 10 hours and not getting anything done because it goes, it's just that different way of experiencing what we call as time, and that's it. Just reminded me of that for some reason as well. But I was just wondering, when you're in a space and, like you say, all of your defining activities, your reading, your music, your walking is away from, and you're just in this one place in this stillness, and you're having to go through all of the emotions and grieve and everything. What do you do when you're just there and you're faced with it, and how do you then move through that time when you have to just be still and work through that? So that's where that question came from.
Yeah, that's such a good way of putting it, because yes, stillness is where I landed, and I think it's where I kind of deeply needed to be. And that, I don't think people have to go through over a decade of illness to achieve that, but I do think that, in my case, that was sort of how I got there. That and living out in the woods. Yeah, it is a really interesting thing. I'm reminded of, I was listening to a speaker who was talking about Einstein and how he visited the Hopi at one point. And he said that he didn't have to explain relativity to those kids because they were living it. Because time really is relative. It does speed up and slow down. And we don't really fully understand that. I mean, there are tons of physicists still working on that one. And saying, well, it might be a little different, or, but it's coming up, and we feel it as human beings, I think. And
then kind of bringing it back to where we started at the beginning and talking about current events, like maybe this time is really kind of dragging itself out, it seems, so that we notice and we feel all that's going on, but then when we look back on it, as with anything, when we kind of look back on time, it's like, where did that go? It's an interesting thing. I think about things a lot, maybe too much sometimes,
No, that is an interesting thing. I can kind of see what you're saying. Yeah. It's sort of like your time, like in that, on that waitress job in that restaurant where nobody was coming in and there was nothing to do. It's sort of like you're just hit with all this. And it's funny because it's like you're talking also about, an environment where you're hit with lots of stuff, but it's kind of the same thing in a way, because it's sort of like, it's not time that's in tune with who you are. It's not time that feels harmonious, I guess would be a way of putting it.
Maybe that's, as soon as you said that, I'm like, maybe that's it. Because when I think of people who work in an environment that just drains the life out of them, they feel every single minute, they experience every single minute, they can't wait to retire, and and then once they get out of that that space where every second is felt and they're fighting, they're just kind of doing it to make a living. Like the wording that gets used around these things, and then how it will wear them out, and people will just like really be drained and aged by the experience. And then once they retire, and then they're in this space where they have free time, they don't know what to do with it. And then the percentage is very high that when people come out the other side of and they're in retirement, decline very quickly, because then they don't have they're not able to work out what it is that they should do. And yet when then you have people who find purpose and joy in their life, they never want to stop. They just, they're like, retire? Why would I do something? What am I going to retire for? Like, because work doesn't feel like work. So it's never anything you want to be away from, because it's creating that experience for you that's not drawing on you, and it's flying. It's we could talk around in circles about this, but and also if you when you see people who have spent a lifetime working in a field that brings them joy, and you compare their experience and their physicality with somebody who's just worked really hard, and not even physically hard, even someone who's just worked in a corporate environment that's like just so against their soul. I mean, it would be interesting, I don't know if anything like this has ever been done, to really see how that's impacted the physiology internally of people who live on purpose and people who do not. I know we know about heart attacks and strokes and those kind of things, but even on a deeper cellular level, what goes on there is.
Yeah, I think honestly, the fight, flight, freeze thing is what goes on there. And I think that your nervous system gets weighed down with a lot of stuff. And probably that's why when you get, for people who do go through careers like this, I mean, there are ways in which I wish I'd been smart enough, it's sort of like I didn't wind up with a professional career or, any kind of stability in finances. But on the other hand, I lived my life, and I am so grateful that I lived my life instead of trying to be somebody else's life. And I'm not saying that a job is necessarily that, but what you're saying, I think, is so true. It's sort of like, if you're deeply involved and engaged in something on a level that's below survival, a level that's deeper than survival, then not only are you going to be healthy, but you're going to resonate, to use your word, and a word I really like, you're going to resonate that health around you, and that's going to be picked up by people and other beings around you. And so I think that that's kind of what healthy humans are designed to do.
And I'm just thinking, well, maybe we've just answered our own question, where we started at the beginning, and we're like, well, what is it that's going to do? And it all comes back to purpose and finding what it is that you want to do. But then in saying that, it's not about finding something. It's not out there. It's just really like connecting to what is being shown to you within, to then experience life as it can be for you, should you choose, or you play the game where you're latching onto the time game externally, and then you just live a different thing. So maybe that is part of it is part of the awakening, because of all the guests that I've had on here, the story is ultimately the same. They move from one space, they go through an experience, they have some awareness of something that is part of their life, and then they turn it into work, and it's something that they never want to stop doing. It just turns their life around and then assists and serves humanity. So we got to we reached the conclusion Sunday by working out it's time. It's like, get into your purpose, and the time will create, and like you say, the resonance of it just impacting and flowing out to everyone is my desire anyway, to see us through what it is that we are being shaken up to realize right now. So
beautifully said.
What's in line with your work now, and if you have anything to share that's coming up, and also tell everybody the best way to reach out to you.
Okay, thank you. If you want to email me, my email is sundayoliver@sundayoliver.com, and my website is sundayoliver.com. And that's a place where I think that you might like to go, because on the Work With Me page, I have some free offerings that you might want to look at. If you sign up on my email list, you'll get a recording of the energy work piece that I did. Plus, you will also get some emails that kind of help you learn how to use it in a way that's most beneficial for you. So I recommend that. And I do also have a YouTube channel where you can go and experience some of my, I talk some, but I also do healing on these videos, and a lot of them are pretty short. So that's a place where you can go. And my channel name is, originally enough, Sunday Oliver. Yeah, imagine that. One of my channels has a webinar that I did, that's sort of an intro webinar for the deeper programs that I do for people who are interested in that. And that's what I call the Healing Catalyst program. I was talking a little bit about the foundation. And so the foundation is a 3-month program. The whole Healing Catalyst program is 12 months, because in my view, it doesn't, you got to go for more than a minute to kind of change yourself in this deeper way. And so if the ideas that we've been talking about how, fighting your way through life is maybe not the optimal way to go, I would really recommend you're reading that page, because it will talk a lot about why, yes, it really isn't the way to go, and why there is another way that you can go, that you don't have to fight your way through life.
Beautiful, beautiful. Thank you, Sunday, for your sharing. Fantastic.
Thank you for your conversation. I really enjoyed this. I love the way you think and dig deep.
Thank you, Sunday, for your conversation, and thank you for listening. Once again, to join in to flow into 2024, look at the links in the show notes, listen to the podcast, and join the mailing list so that you can receive the journal pages to do the deeper work for yourself and flow into 2024. If you want to find out more about me, you can go to my website. It's carolmaywhittick.com, carolmaywhittick.com. Find me on Facebook, Carol May Whittick, and on LinkedIn under Carol May Whittick, and on Instagram, Casmic, that's CAZMICK. So until next week, take care.